Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Meet the Author series. Tonight, we are featuring Hafza Girdap. She is our guest tonight. And then we have our moderator, Lopita Neth. So my name is Ferhat Öztürk. I'm from Raindrop Foundation, San Antonio, and I'm the event coordinator for the Meet the Author programs. So before we move on our program, I would like to introduce our moderator, Lopita Neth. So Dr. Lopita Neth is the chair of the History Department and the coordinator of the Asian Studies program at the University of the Incarnate Word, San Antonio, Texas. She, as an educator, has taught over 31 years in the fields of Asian and world history, migration studies, refugee issues, and human rights. Dr. Nath is a Fulbright Scholar and recipient of the Social Science Research Council Award. At UIW, she was awarded Faculty Award for Service Learning in 2020, Presidential Teaching Award 2019, and Moody Professor Award 2015. Her research expertise is in migration in Asia, human displacement, refugees, citizenship, and human rights. Her current research focuses on Bhutanese refugee resettlement in the US. Since 2010, she visited Bhutanese refugee camps in Nepal several times and also worked with resettled refugees in Columbus, Ohio, Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio. Currently, Dr. Nath is working on her book on the Bhutanese refugees resettlement in the United States. So as being an active academician as well, she is directing so many programs, and one of them is co-directing the SAILO Unity in Action, which is a refugee mentoring program in San Antonio that helps refugees transition to life in America through women empowerment, ESL programs, tutoring, and other help that the refugees in need in collaboration with several community partners. So please welcome Dr. Lopita Neth.
Thank you, Farhad. Thank you very much. And thank you to the Raindrop Foundation for organizing this event. I think this is really a good way to introduce to our audience about this issue in Turkey that very few people know and hear about. Before I move on to other things, I would like to introduce our moderator. I'll introduce our speaker, Hafza Girdap, and she is also the editor of this book, Baby in the Bag. So Hafza Girdap is the executive director and spokesperson for Advocates of Silenced Turkey, or AST. And AST is a nonprofit organization based in the United States committed to bringing attention to the rights violations in Turkey. A founding member of Set Them Free platform, which covers crimes against women, particularly in Turkey, Girdap is for Amnesty International. As an activist, she spoke at various platforms, including the UN General Assembly, the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, and also on the World Affairs Council. Peace conference, where she detailed the ongoing violations in Turkey and the tragedy that is happening in Turkey as we speak. Girdap is also currently pursuing her PhD in Women's and Gender Studies at Stony Brook University in New York. And her research area is human and women's rights in Muslim context, integration and adaptation of Muslim immigrant women, along with a focus on redefinition of their cultural identities. So I would also like to mention here that Ms. Girdap is also very committed to youth and women's development, and not only collective action, but also individual support and mentorship, because she really echoes Malala Yousafzai's idea, which resonates her own dedication to each and every person's life and empowerment. And Malala's idea of one child, one teacher, one book, one pen can change the world really, speaks for what Ms. Girdap is doing. She has her own social media account where she runs several of these ideas. She has taught several courses at Emory University's continuous education program in Atlanta, Georgia. And so we have a very, enterprising, very amazing person with us today who brings us an amazing book. So before we go to Ms. Girdap and let her talk to us, I just wanted to place this in the context of what we are uh, looking at right now. And as you see that my work has been on, for the last several years, has been on global refugee issues. I work with resettlement. I am working with a particular community, the Bhutanese refugee community, but I'm also, I teach classes on refugees where the students are working with refugees. And so I come across several refugees and we're dealing with the latest updates and information. So as we see that this global refugee crisis is the largest humanitarian crisis in the world. And even no more so now in the year of the pandemic. So while the focus of the world has turned to the pandemic and the sufferings accompanying it, the problem of the refugees have not gone away, is ever present and continues to grow. And as I included, would like to see it go away, but it isn't, at least for the moment. And the numbers continue to grow. And according to the latest data from the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, we see that there are 79.5 million displaced people in the world and about 26 million refugees, among them, of which 20.4 million are under the UNHCR mandate, and the rest, 5.6 million, are under the Palestinian refugees. Of these, about 45.7 are internally displaced persons. That means they have not left their countries, and about 4.2 million are asylum seekers. As you grapple with these numbers, I would also like to recommend that you look up the Geneva Convention. The 1951 Geneva Convention gives us the first definition on who a refugee is. And I would like to read this definition because, we are often confused the difference between who a refugee is, who is an immigrant, who is an asylum seeker. And the 1951 Convention establishing the UNHCR spells out that a refugee is someone who, owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group or political opinion, please underline that, is outside the country of his nationality, is unable to, owing such fear, is unwilling to avail himself of the protection of his country. This definition, although it was first started in 1951, it has seen several amendments and several changes to suit the different countries. In addition to that, I would also like to read a very simple definition by our former UN Secretary General, Kofi Annan. Most refugees are ordinary people living extraordinary lives, driven from their homes by fear, conflict, and persecution. They've had to give up jobs, possessions, dreams, even families in the struggle to survive. They remain one of the most vulnerable people in our societies. They need assistance and protection, and they need understanding. And I read this because this is very pertinent to our book today. The other factor that I also want to bring to you is that the top refugee producing country is Syria, and the largest hosting country is Turkey. So as we look at this, let me bring this conversation to the topic of today, the persecution in Turkey of a group of sympathizers for the Hizmet movement. And as we go by the definition, they are facing persecution for the support of a movement that is known for its philanthropic, educational, and interfaith promotion. The people had to flee Turkey, take risks, and we have all heard about the risks that the people have taken while crossing the Mediterranean. The sea has become an unmarked grave for so many. And as we go through the discussion today, I want you all to focus on one element that is needed to protect human rights. So, if we say we care about human rights, we cannot pick and choose whose rights we will protect. I know that this is a personal choice, but in this case, Turkey is hosting the largest number of refugees and yet has caused some of its own citizens to become refugees, flee, and seek asylum in other countries. So at this moment, I would like to bring Hafsa into the conversation, and I would like to ask Hafsa, could you please tell us a little bit about your journey behind this book and the purpose of writing this book, purpose of editing these stories into such a beautiful, powerful book?
Thank you, Lupita, for this beautiful introduction, and thank you for this opportunity to you and to Raindrop Foundation. So let me start from the very beginning. I came to the United States just on the day of the attempted coup in 2016. Was taking my students to a summer vacation and a language course here in the United States as usual. And then schools, including mine, were shut down. I saw that there was no way to survive freely, securely, safely, and decided to stay here. If I had gone back, I would absolutely have been arrested since I was on the administration board and also because I was very active in many NGOs. Considering this, I felt the urge to speak out, to speak up and take place in the human rights fight against injustice there back in Turkey. With that said, in our organization, in AST, Advocacy of Silence Turkey, which hundreds of volunteers are doing a lot of work to raise awareness and take action. We are doing, we are giving voice to the voiceless people. Among those works is archiving the stories of the survivors. I'm avoiding to use the word victim. It's a negative feeling, so I'm using the survivor. Among them, these archiving these stories of the survivors of that huge purge, huge persecution. We have been interviewing them, these persecuted people, and writing their true stories, true life stories, and translating them into many languages. The baby in the bag is one of them and consists of four of those true life stories, and it reflects hundreds of thousands of others' experiences.
Thank you, Hafsa. That is so amazing and so touching. Um, Now, I would, since a lot of our audience has not read the book, I want you to introduce them to the book, and I want you to, read a few paragraphs, a few lines from the book that you think were really, really powerful. So I want you to just take a few minutes and to go through the book and tell us, little excerpts from the book.
So it's hard because all the lines, all the words are touching, but yeah, I will choose among them. On page 25, the first story, as a mother, it touched me a lot, and I am sure that it will resonate with many others. At the very bottom of the page, it says that I sat, I stood, I paced, I lay down. What felt to me like centuries going by was probably just 10 minutes. What's more, as the hours stretched on, another problem arose. Being that I was a mother who had newly given birth and had been nursing, my breasts started to become swollen, and I was in great pain. If they could at least give me some pain relievers, if only my pain could be quieted down somewhat. I called out, I yelled. Nobody answered my calls. I made foolish hand gestures towards the camera, waiting for someone to notice, but still no one came. And I'm gonna go on with the second story, and it's gonna be page 70. Again, it's the story of a woman, a mother of three. We marched onward, but our anxiety rose with every minute that passed. Eventually, they told me one of the things that I had feared most throughout this entire trip, that my older son could not accompany me anymore. I did not understand why and began to get hysterical. They separated us while we were in tears. I was crying while my son was screaming, "Mom!" The little ones also began to burst into tears too, but they forced us to separate. They were going to take us to the dorm for women and children, and my older one was going to be taken to the dorm for adult men. I could not speak English, and as if that is not bad enough, now they were separating me from my son. Our cries were echoing throughout the hallways. We had serious trauma and left each other in tears. My poor son cried so much and kicked the walls that they decided to let us see each other for 10 minutes, after which we were separated again. We were both scared, helpless, and did not know what was waiting for us. And the next story, at the very first page of the next story, page 77, I was once regarded as a well respected and admired academician in Turkey. That changed overnight. Everyone around me started to disappear. Those who used to smile at me started to look the other way. Those who praised my character, career, and diligence started to talk behind my back. I was declared an enemy of the state. They had already chosen their side, and I was left on the opposite side. It seems that I had chosen my fate, and when I had decided to speak out against my government, whose corrupt leaders were exposed in a huge police investigation in December 2013, I had aligned myself with those who bravely shouted, "The emperor has no clothes." And the last part will be from the last story and from the last page of the book. Canada was one of the options in my mind when we were leaving Turkey. And after some discussion, we decided to stay in the US because we had no energy left to have another adventurous border crossing. After such a hard time, we really needed a peaceful and ordinary life. Eventually, we submitted ourselves to God and decided to stay in the US. Crossing the Marissa River was when we felt on the edge between life and death.
Thank you. Thank you. That was so powerful. You covered suffering, you covered the reality, you covered, the trauma about crossing a border and seeking asylum, and also brought our attention to some of the issues that we have been hearing about in the news, like what is happening at the customs and immigration centers in the border. So I would, as we move forward, I know the audience is really interested to hearing more about what the different stories cover. And I have divided the section into a few, in this conversation, into a few sections. First, I would like to talk about Turkey, what happened in Turkey. And in the third story on page 81, the narrator talks about this Turkish saying, when the wolf is determined to eat the lamb, he would say he was punishing her for she was muddling the water while drinking for it. And I thought that was so, so like what was happening in the land, and the narrator finds this appropriate quote. Can you explain to the audience why this was so disturbing? And we've seen examples of authoritarian regimes around the world. So can you tell the audience about how the different examples of oppression and harassment the people had to face after the coup? Why were they blaming the Hizmet movement sympathizers for the coup?
Yeah, sure. So I believe, and also it's a common sense, that power holders claim power through different means, such as traditions, religion, ideologies, economic dynamics, and so on. And when those in power consolidate more power, it becomes a necessity for them to keep it that way. It's kind of, power poison. So even a tiny bit risk or threat should be eliminated, they believe. And when we come back to our case in Turkey, the corruption investigation in 2013 triggered such a threat for the power holders, I mean the Erdogan regime. And all the opposition, not only political actors, but also the voices of all dissidents, regardless of their affiliations, are targeted to be silenced. And dismissals of 130,000 people, arbitrary detentions, confiscations of business, closures of institutions, including educational institutions and also healthcare services, violence and discrimination against women, tortures in custody and detentions are among these, brutal acts of the Erdogan regime, Erdogan government. Then the regime needed an enemy to cover their corruption up. So the most convenient group seemed to be the Hizmet movement, considering the number of the sympathizers and their organizations and these sympathizers once established. So the well-educated, sophisticated, group in Turkey was the scapegoated group for the governments in corruption be covered up.
Wow, that was, that kind of resonates with for the Secretary General Kofi Annan's definition of refugees. That, here you have ordinary people who have been labeled, and as I read through the book, I've seen the word terrorists being used. And we're talking about professors, we are talking about academicians, we're talking about mothers, and so it is really interesting and, appalling, I should say, to see this happening to simple people who never imagined that their life will be turned upside down. And so, in the same story on page 85, the narrator of the story talks about his own conflict on the question of innocence versus guilty. And as people, we are so quick to judge others unless it happens to you. And you only when you are thrown into such an abyss that you get a chance to, reflect and to understand the reality, the truth. Can you tell us a little bit or tell the audience a little bit about what the narrator was going through as he was reflecting? And we see these reflections a lot throughout the book, where people are sitting and thinking, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? Right?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I call such an experience as empathy, maybe. Of course, we can have empathy for those who undergo different experiences we have ever never known. But truly understanding, feeling goes through experiencing it, feeling it. And before that, we have solidarity for the people that face oppression we haven't faced, violence we haven't been subjected to, and so on. I feel the empathy that the academic in that story, in the third story of the book, the story is called like Exile. That academic experience detention, being in detention as a person who has always abided by the laws in his life, and then happened to question if all those prisoners were actually criminals. They're there. And such a reflection goes on with experiencing fleeing hometowns illegally or with enforced migration. And we ended up with being immigrants here and then came to understand the situations of Syrian immigrants back in Turkey. So, yeah, hundreds of thousands of persecuted people could see, could hear, could feel what others also undergo, I believe.
Thank you. So well said, Hafsa. Really, really gives us, brings us down to this other part of the story where, placed in that kind of a situation, some people could make it out of Turkey. Not all. Some people are still, languishing in the prisons. The mothers are there, separated or with their little babies in the jails, and I cannot think of something worse than having a child grow up in a prison. So in the first story, that was the baby in the bag, the example of transferring the baby in the bag and the raw human emotion that goes with it. Because we all know when we put a body in a bag, right? Everybody knows that.
Mm-hmm,
In
mm-hmm.
this story, we are looking at a mother who was forced to put her baby in the bag because the baby did not have the adequate paperwork to leave, and they might be held back. So, can you talk a little bit about how you felt when you were editing this story? Because I know it was really hard. It was really.
Yeah, because of my position in the organization, also my position in the academy, I have been interviewing lots of women in different cases of violence or discrimination or oppression. And even though I am hearing those stories, those experiences for several times, reading it again was very touching, was very hard, tough for me because I'm a mother. I can, feel, I can understand what that mother felt there. So, as I said, my friends and I in our organization have been communicating with hundreds of people who are the victims of that inhumane persecution. And among them are a lot of women, a lot of mothers. Each and every one of them has their own stories, has their own experiences. Passing the Evros River by boat, facing the risk of being drowned, cold, tiredness, hunger, and so forth. All these experiences double the impact of those harsh circumstances for mothers, since they feel not only for themselves but also for their kids. So the doctor in that story, as a mother, was urged to give some medicine to her baby to let him sleep because the smugglers wanted her to do so. And she was devastated because how a tiny baby could be exposed to such a drug. You see, you can imagine. And it was not just this. Then she was, urged to put her baby in a bag, not to be heard by the border patrol, not to be seen by the border patrol. And she describes the situation with those words here. I mean, the smugglers dropped an unexpected bomb on us. This is a very strong feeling. And these words actually speak for herself to explain how she was scared, how helpless she felt. But what touches me the most here in that experience is her brief consideration to compare what happens if she reacts this and stays back in Turkey, and she just quickly imagines what kind of future awaits for her baby, and then she had to make a decision. She had to choose that or that, and she chose freedom even if there is a risk of death. And this is touching, this is so real for hundreds of thousands of others. And to be have to choose is, I think, the most hard part of that kind of journeys.
And I think, when you said that, that story really, kind of gave me goosebumps. That moment when she was crossing over and her husband had to cross first with the baby and she was then going. Because, anybody who has dealt with these kind of or heard these kind of stories, it takes a second for your life to change.
Yeah.
If for some reason the border patrol looked at your passport and found something wrong,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
go by, and your whole life changes in an instant. And so I think the same way on page 92 in the third story, the author talks about his attempt to escape. And that's also another moment where he writes, I ran and ran and ran and ran. And it did not matter in what direction. I was just running into the darkness. And then he falls into a wheat field and he was hiding there as he heard these police patrol zipping by. And he didn't know who to call, even though he had a phone, but his phone was dying. And we all know who deal with phones these days, like all the numbers are on your phone. If your phone is dead, you don't know any number to.
Yeah.
So I think that was again another moment where you see that they want to escape, but then they cannot, and they are failing. There have been so many failures in the first attempt to escape. And that makes it even more traumatic, that how difficult it is. So can you tell us something about this part of the story?
Yeah, sure. And I believe the background of that moment, that particular moment, goes way back. You're alone in Turkey, literally alone. If you're somewhat labeled or stigmatized by a certain, definition by the regime, you have to choose either to stay and face being civilly dead, and or to risk your life and flee your hometown, leaving behind everything. So many of those people, persecuted people, choose the second option for a freer and a safer life. But the journey is not that easy as it sounds. You have to trust people you have ever never known, and you even don't know if they are really the ones who could help you. But you have to try in any ways. You do whatever the voice on the other side of a cell phone says. You go where that voice says. There are a lot of risks being handed to the police by those smugglers or secret service, and that happens. They take the money from both sides, and they abandon you. So the risk of being abandoned after your money is taken, facing deadly circumstances, fear during your journey, and more, of course. And that academic in that story is a respected person. And he was subject to use such illegal and dangerous ways to survive. It's also embarrassing for that person. I heard these stories, how they felt in that way. And isn't it ironic, to risk death to survive? So he calls the only number he remembers. As you said, it's impossible for us to remember. I don't know my husband's number right now. I cannot, call him from a different phone. And, he calls the only number he remembers at the moment when everything is forgotten, not just the numbers. And he could be arrested or lose his freedom. So with the only hope to be saved by the only person he could call, he still tries to survive. The survival struggle, I must say, to describe my feeling for the situation.
Yes, and I've always, when dealing with refugees or immigrants, I've always tried to place, I'm an immigrant myself, but I'm not a refugee, so I have not lived in a camp. And that was the reason why I went back to the camps to see where these people came from, how they lived their lives. And it is really heartbreaking, to see that the conditions that they come from, the conditions that they are thrown into for no fault of theirs. So in several of the stories, one of the main issues of asylum seekers is crossing these different borders, and you don't know what kind of border checks or border patrol you will be running against. And so in several of the stories, the narrators talk about border crossings. And in recent years, we have heard, especially when we talk about the US-Mexico border, as a couple of many of our narrators in the story had to cross the US-Mexico border, and we hear about the inhumanity of the border. We are assuming that horrible things will happen at the border. People will be exploited at the hands of the officials, harassed. But these stories, as you see, also show us another picture of good people, compassion, humanity. Amidst all the horrors, you find someone who's going to help you, someone who's offering you a food or a blanket, or who says a kind word. So, what do you think about these two sides of the stories and the narratives that we hear in the news and the stories in the book? I think that was a real eye opener, right?
Yeah, absolutely. What you say is very important. Two sides of the story, two, sides of a coin. So the incidents that take place at the borders or at the detention centers may be different. There are different experiences. in those places. And immigration policies made by politicians have an impact on the officers. This is a fact, we have to admit. But on the other hand, these officers are individuals. They are human beings, just like the ones who try to escape, who try to migrate, who seek a better life. So they, in many occasions, these officers behave humanely. I heard some of the stories I heard lots of stories, and some of these stories are from Canada, some from Greece, some from Mexico border, just like one of the stories in the book, the second story, A Life of Adventure. And I believe if we as civil society organizations and also as individuals who are academics, journalists, or authors, if we raise awareness of the experiences of those people more often, I believe more officers at the borders, at the detention centers, become more understanding and more supportive.
Yes, and that was such an eye opener because in one story you hear about the son screaming, because he was separated from his mother. And then the next instance, you see that, they allowed the brother to be with the older brother. So you see that there are little, instances of compassion and humanity that we encounter in these stories. And I think that was really, really touching. Also, one thing that, really, touched me as I was reading through these stories, talking about how ordinary people behave, because human beings are react when thrown into such big and unimaginable political situations that they never thought they will find themselves in. Like, I don't know how I'm going to react when somebody comes and says, okay, you will be arrested now, or I'm going to search your house. I will be thrown into a panic situation. And a few things that really struck me were on page 94, the author, in spite of him and his wife so worried about what's going to happen now, what's going to happen tomorrow, he was thinking about missing taking the daughter to the park. There were several instances about them like, oh, we are feeling so sad because our children cannot go to a picnic or cannot go to a park or cannot, they're missing out their holidays. So, it seems really mundane. Like, why are they, when you're reading, you're thinking, why are they talking about the park?
Yeah.
They are faced with such a big trauma of their lives, the park can wait. But again, at the same time, when I rethought it, I thought, in these kind of tragic life and death situations, these very acts of everyday life was disrupted. And I think, you must have felt the same way, Hafsa. Can you tell us why you kept those parts as you were editing the stories? Because those parts really, gave me, really gave me shivers. I was like, why is he talking about the park? He should run now,
Yeah. I hear you, Lupita, and I hear what you're saying. First and foremost, I'd like to say that we are very careful about being loyal to the original story told by the participants themselves. And these details are displaying such loyalty. Also, this kind of small details in the stories are telling us that people are seeking hope among anything. Even such trivial activities pose as hope and also distracting them amidst the chaos, amidst the devastating happenings. And one last thing I want to say about them is that life is going on, whatever it takes. We go on our lives after passing away of our most beloved ones. I lost my dad in 2 months ago, and you know what? It was very strange that we went on eating, we went on breathing, we went on going out. So yeah, we go on our lives and we go on after most disappointing incidents because we are alive. We have beloved ones who rely on us. Most importantly, children, our children deserve their lives to go on with hope. That's why.
And that is such a powerful, statement because in one of the stories, I think it's the the exile story, where he talks about how after he escaped and made it, and it's on page 98, and I just have to read this quote. You know, I have learned to find small sources of hope for survival throughout this journey, and to string these hopes together in order to, in order for me, in order to, sorry, to make a strong rope with which I cling to life.
Mhm.
I think, you know, that is so powerful. We, you know, it's reality. We always live in hope. And
Mhm.
I remember reading this on a UNHCR pamphlet, that one refugee with a hope lost is one too many. You know, so you cannot give up hope. You cannot give up, you know, what you are clinging onto, the hope of a life that is better, the hope of freedom, the hope of, you know, going out and making a life for yourself. And also, it says that it becomes really hard for one to feel sad for themselves while witnessing such life changing and traumatizing tragedies. So, although they are looking at life and they are upset and they are facing these problems, but they are also having this sense of compassion for other people. So discuss this compassion and how these, you know, people are humane. How could you afford that? How could you be so generous? You know, and remember, these are ordinary people thrown into bad political situations. Can
Yeah,
you can you say something about that? You know, I really would love to hear that part.
I would love that. My thoughts will echo what I said earlier. The people who are exposed to such a huge purge and violations of real basic rights are once a part of the greater society, as teachers, as business people, as doctors, as academics, as housewives, as philanthropists who contribute to their own communities. And all of a sudden, they are thrown under the bus as scapegoats. But no matter what they experience, even the most agitating experiences, they still hope to have a better future for themselves and for their beloved ones, for their families, and hope to survive merges with the feeling that there are people who experience more traumatizing conditions, more harsher circumstances, and having sort of a gratitude for the tiny positive aspects in our lives, and it generates strength, I believe, I feel. In addition to that, I want to reflect on what I feel along with my friends who do their best to be a voice of those voiceless people who feel responsibility for the people back in Turkey. Even if we, as newcomers here in the US, are trying to build up a new life from scratch, they still continue to be a support for those in Turkey. We have to, go on that in Turkey, in Greece, not just in financial terms, but also as being sisters and brothers. There are really a lot of families here in the United States, in Europe, who have sister or brother families in Greece or in Turkey. They are sharing what they have in financial terms, in hope terms, or even their kids are tutoring each other's kids. This is kind of solidarity or support mechanism. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And you know, I also was really touched by the children. You know, those the two boys that had to, you know, came with the parents and talked about how much strength the little boy had, that he was playing this game when his mother couldn't walk anymore. You know,
Mm-hmm.
so you see what courage these little children were showing in this midst, and you think that they are children, but they become, you know, almost mature in these kind of situations. And they, you know, you don't want to tell them. You always want to protect your children by telling them, not telling them the truth. But as you see, they understand. They understand so much, you know. And I think That is what was really, beautiful about these stories. So
Mm-hmm.
I would like to go and read some of the comments that we got, and you can comment on that, Hafsa. The first one was from Dr. Suleiman Tech, where he writes that there's no religion or nation of a refugee, and we should all support no matter what is the background of a refugee. So what would you, do you want to address that comment? I think it's a beautiful comment.
Yeah, it goes back to our comments about empathy. So we don't need to experience what those people experience. It's just so that it's just empathy, it's just sympathy. So we have to share what we have, as I said, in financial terms, in sisterhood, in brotherhood, everything. Yeah, when we came here to United States after the Kuwait attempt, lots of hundreds of families, those who came to the United States way earlier, opened their houses, everything, they shared what they had, and it's kind of a solidarity, and it should happen not just in the same community. We have to expand our solidarity to those that we don't know. It's kind of a empathy, as I said. Yeah, we have to take our friends' bags.
Yeah. So there's another, comment from Sadir Altanok here. And Mr. Altanok writes that thank you for bringing up these issues and educating the world about what is really happening in today's Turkey. He's very excited about the book. He says the book is also excellent. I recommend it highly, and I do too. I could not put it down. So, can you talk a little bit about the reality versus what people are hearing about Turkey? And how much are people paying attention to this issue? Because
That's
I
very
think
important,
that
Lupita.
it's a
Yeah,
global problem. Yeah.
yeah, sorry. So he used the word educate. This is very important. Educate, raising awareness, training, letting know. We are, as in our organization, we are producing lots of reports. We are doing lots of press conferences, human rights conferences, panels. But archiving true life stories, they tell the real life of human beings, and it touches to the hearts of everyone, not just those who have access to that kind of reports, because true life stories are speaking for themselves. So through these stories, through the experiences, real experiences of those people, we want to take draw the attention of people who could help us to take action, and we have to educate them. Yeah, you're right, right.
And I always like to say this because, the whole refugee crisis is a numbers game. The more, in a way, the more, or the larger the number is, the more the refugees are. That is when the international community stands up and pays attention.
Mm-hmm.
You have like 6 million, 7 million, 10 million, people are like, oh my gosh, this is a problem. But when it's 100,000 or 150,000, people are like, oh, that's too less a number. We can ignore. And I have seen this even in the case of my Bhutanese refugees, where they are, 100,000, and they're falling down this radar of the international attention. So,
Mm-hmm.
Farhat also talks about every story in the book touches on a different string of art. And I will add a question that Sumera talks about, because Farhat says that these stories are all very riveting, and I totally agree with him. And
Mm-hmm.
Sumera asked the question is that how did you decide when picking these four specific stories from the whole, uh, the many stories that you've come across?
So I have to admit that it's a hard, it's a tough call, because it's not only me. There are lots of volunteers who work on this project, and it's the work of their struggle. It's the work of their dedication, commitment, and among the hundreds of touching stories, to choose just four of them, it's hard. But these four stories reflect women's perspectives, academics' perspectives, reflect immigration perspectives, fleeing through Evros River or the Mexican border, or running, being detained while escaping the country. There are lots of different experiences which could also reflect on many others' experiences. So these four stories are kind of a small sample of hundreds of thousands of others.
And I think they're very, very reflective of what is actually happening, because I liked the part in those stories where you talk about their jail experiences, what
Mm-hmm.
man is going through in a jail,
Mm-hmm.
and is, like how if you have education, you can get out of jail. Whereas, when her friend Fidan couldn't leave the jail, was still had to be arrested. And a few days later, her husband got arrested. So
Mm-hmm.
you see these, different varieties of stories, but that is what is happening.
Mm-hmm.
It's so reflective. Um, there is another question here, is that what do you recommend to the survivors of these persecutions about telling their stories? Uh, how can they store the stories for the records?
Thank you so much for this question, because yeah, it's very important. Of course, more and more people need to tell their stories. These are not, this is not an only archiving project. Of course, we will need these details in the future while we are asking for, compensations, financial compensations, or, in the courts, in the trials, in domestic law or in international law. We will need these details, but also these are gonna be, warning signs in the future for the future generations. Be careful. That's a sign that is saying a danger, a threat, a democratization problem or undemocratization problem is coming. So people are going to be much more careful in terms of, reading the warning signs. Yes, and I strongly recommend those people to tell their stories. And I also want to say that they don't need to be scared, because I know that most of these people still have their family members back in Turkey, and they are scared for these people, not to throw them under the bus. So we are very careful with the confidentiality. These are not the real names. The stories are original. The experiences are real. So the names, the person's name or the name of the city, these are of course confidential. So people can be very relieved in terms of feeling secure while telling their stories. But we need their stories to speak up, more strongly.
And I think that is so important, especially, as dealing with refugee stories myself all the time. I always tell them, you need to write down your experiences, because one of the issues that we see as we, talk to the refugees, over time, the older people will pass on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Will forget their stories, and the
Mm-hmm.
younger generation who come into this, free Western life almost get disconnected. So there's always that element of, forgetting. There's the element of, disconnect with what happened in the homeland, either, by nature or even by intention. Sometimes you don't want to remember the worst part of your life, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
People will forget. So this is so important that they are actually, you're trying to encourage this, and everybody should be, even if it's a simple story, I think you should talk about it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right, absolutely. And they can reach us by writing an email to help@silencedturkey.org. Help@silencedturkey.org. If they send an email saying that I want to share my story, the relevant person will reach out to them with the confidentiality idea as in, concern.
Thank you. This, I wish you good luck, and I encourage everybody to get a copy of this book, Baby in the Bag. I know that you must have seen that in the Eventbrite advertisement. It's available on Amazon, and trust me, you will not put it down. And the simplest, what I also liked about the book was how simple it was. It was very simply written, and it touches you because of the simplicity. And also you will find that they have kept the language barrier there is, and through that you can hear the expressions of the people,
Mhm.
how they are feeling, how they are, what they are going through. So this has been kept very well. And Hafsa, I congratulate you on this.
Thank you.
You have done an amazing job with this. It is, to use the word, what everybody says, it's really, really awesome. It is amazing. It is, and I'm sure it's a great tribute to these people, to their sufferings, and for the next generation. So
Mm.
I hand it over to Farhad.
And
Okay, I'd
on
like,
behalf of, sorry, Farhad, on behalf of my friends who put really great effort on this project, thank you so much for this opportunity.
I'd like to thank you both. Hafsa and Lopita. This was such an emotional book introduction, and as well as featuring this book. But on the other hand, maybe I would share my personal experience as well, but briefly about this book. So normally I bought this book and then it was just sitting on my to be read. But one night when the last week, we had a very difficult time in San Antonio and Texas because of the weather conditions. So we did not have electric, and under my cell phone's flashlight. So I read this book until 2:30 a.m. and I finished in one sitting. So I couldn't leave it, so it's like every story is connecting somehow to your heart. And then
Mm.
as I know people that who experience these, as I personally experienced some of these. So it's a very touchy, it's very like riveting, as the name indicates. So it's really moves with you. And
Yeah.
I highly recommend, the people just to read it when they have a good amount of time, because
Mm.
once you start reading it, you will not give up. So until you finish it. So again, thank you so much, Hafsa. And maybe my question, that when is the next book? You have hundreds of stories as far as I heard. So is there a new book coming, or is there another book coming? Can you just give us some good news about those?
Yeah, the second book is just out, Shoot Me for the God's Sake, and it's on Amazon too. And it tells the story of a mother, a woman who, experienced this flee through Evros River, ended up in Greece, and then learned that his small little kid had leukemia, and the father is in Germany waiting for the family reunification, and they experienced such a hard time, and then they came finally eventually together, and she's strong, she's hopeful, and she's now fighting against injustice, and being a voice for those voiceless people. It's a strong book too. I highly recommend it. Shoot Me for the God's Sake. You can find it on our website, www.silenceturkey.org. So yeah, we're going on.
Thank you so much. And we are looking forward for the new ones as well. And I believe these series will be like we'll telling all these stories for the next generations and for our generations as well, to better understand what is really happening in Turkey for the survivors of all this persecution. Thank you so much, Hafsa. Thank you so much, Lopita, for your wonderful moderation. So right now we are ending our Meet the Author series this time, and hopefully we'll have another author next month. Thank you so much for joining today, and
Yeah.
have a great
So will
evening,
this
have a great
be,
night. Oh, sorry.
yes, Farhad, will this be available on YouTube for people that didn't get to see it?
Yeah.
Yes, it's a live submission right now. So once we finish this, it will be recorded on YouTube and the Raindrop Foundation San Antonio's YouTube channel.
Yeah.
So the people can watch from there again.
Yeah,
Hopefully.
and also I'd like to take, this moment to tell you on behalf of hundreds of, volunteers in our organization, and also on behalf of the persecuted people with whom I'm in close contact for my academic researchers also, how much I appreciate, how grateful I am to you for your concern and support for human rights, women's rights. Thank you.
And I would like to just end by saying, thank you for trusting me with this, because, I know that this is so important, not just to the whole world, but also to you personally.
Yes.
I know it's hard to, place that trust about your personal experience on someone, so I really appreciate it. I enjoyed, I won't say I enjoyed, reading the book, but it was really, as Farhad said, it touched your heart, and I'm excited to read your next book. And thank
Thank you.
you again, everyone. And
Thank you.
thanks, the
Bye-bye.
audience.
Bye-bye. Okay.